If your component has more than one use state, or you think that you need something more complex than that, I think it's probably time to move to useReducer. And if you're wondering what useReducer is, how it works and how to use it, then you're in the right place. Now, before the context and reducer hooks in React, there were third-party libraries for managing a global state in React apps. The one I've used is called Redux, and the way it works is it has a store, which is a global store, and we have reducers and actions. The global state in Redux is essentially a JSON object kept in memory or in local storage, and this keeps the state of the whole app. So if you have users, the logged in users, if you were fetching details or whatever, you would keep them in there and you can access them from anywhere in your app. And we can dispatch actions to say, for example, fetching users or fetching products or whatever. And the reducer is what catches those dispatched actions and changes the store or the global state object. I've already made a video about use context. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch that one, because I'm going to be using the same example in this video to talk about useReducer. But essentially what the useReducer hook is a more complicated or a more advanced useState hook. Now with useState, you have the value and a set value functions. And you can keep an object in this, which gives it a lot of flexibility. But if you want something more complex, and I'll go into some examples here, but that's where useReducer shines. And the useReducer accepts a function that has the current value, which is the state, and the dispatch function, which you can use anywhere in your app. And when you dispatch this function, it's gonna go to your reducer and you can update the state in there. Now, here's an example. I have an app here that basically has a few products. I think ChatGPT made this app, to be honest, but it's a Next.js app, and I have a context here and a cart provider for my cart in the app. So I can go in the products and I can add items to my cart, and there they are. I can remove them, whatever. Cool. So that's using a React context. And we can see here that I have a state of cart items, which is basically an array of a cart item objects. And I have set cart items, which is pretty regular for useState. And then I have handle set cart items, which is the function I'm invoking whenever I need to update the cart items. And because this is useState, this is basically kept in memory, and if I refresh, then I lose the object. Cool. So far, I hope this is making sense. Now, if I were to move this to a useReducer, that will look something like this. So we can see here, instead of useState, I have a useReducer, and I have a state and a dispatch functions that are coming off of that useReducer hook. And then I have a cart reducer and the initial state. We can go to the initial state, we'll see what it is. And then these are the values in my context, and then I can use these wherever I want the context to be used on. Cool. So if I go to the cart reducer, this is where all the magic happens. I have a few actions that I'm doing here. I have an action to add to cart, I have an action to remove from cart, and I have an action to clear cart fully. And the initial state here, we can see it is an object with cart items, and there it's an empty array, and that's the initial state. Awesome. Now let's run through this function. The function has the state, which is the current state when we dispatch a new event, and we have an action or the payload. I've called it an action, but this is basically the payload we send in that dispatch, and I'll show you in a minute how that looks. But when you came here, we have a type of the payload or the action. This is basically wrapped in a switch, and we have, if it's adding to cart, then we have some logic here to find the existing item. If there is an existing item, then we only update the quantity. Otherwise, we add a new item to my cart, to my array of cart items. And that's pretty simple. And this is custom logic to my app. If you're using this for your app, it's going to be different depending on your logic, the requirements for your app. And then the remove cart, pretty self-explanatory, goes through all the cart items. So the return here is basically what the new state will be. So we are saying keep the old state here, anything else here, and then for cart items you want to filter out the the item from the payload. And depending on what type of action it is, the payload is either a cart item if I'm adding a new item to the cart, or it's a number, which is basically the ID of the cart item. And then the clear cart basically just sets the new state of cart items to be an empty array. I don't think I use this in my app anyways. Let's go to where we dispatch events, and then I'll wrap it all together hopefully, and everything will make sense. Now, because this is a context and I have my whole app wrapped in that context, I have a cart provider here which wraps my whole app, and I can use that everywhere. So for example, in my header, I have a small thing here that calculates the total price of all the items in my cart, and this is using the context. And then in my context, I'm exposing the state and a set and a dispatch function. Here I don't dispatch anything, I just use the state. And this is basically context behavior, but I'm getting the items, calculating the price, blah, blah, blah. Now let's go to a product. This is where I actually dispatch an event to add items to a cart. Here we see that I'm using the dispatch from the cart context hook, and I'm dispatching, and this is the payload. This is my action. I'm dispatching an action of type add to cart, and the payload is my product. Cool. So this will be dispatched, and it will go into that reducer, check the action type, it's add to cart, do all this logic, and update the state. And that's why we see that my total price changes in the header when I add items to cart. And one more place where I use this is in the cart. Here I can remove items from my cart or just show them. And you see here, using the cart context, using both here the dispatch and the state, I just use the cart items. I have a total price, and I basically map out all the cart items. And then the remove, I dispatch a different event here, which is remove from cart, and the payload is the ID of the product. And that looks something like this. And you can see it updates the header as well. And then I need to go again and add more items. Then I can remove each one individually. Cool. So those are the 3 steps. We have useReducer, which gives us a state and a dispatch function. And it takes a function and the initial state. Whenever I dispatch an event, I can send a payload. And this is why useReducer is better or more advanced than useState, because in useState you can't really send the payload to when you update the state. You can kind of do other stuff. I'm not really gonna go into it. There's enough articles around it for that, but if you just want to dispatch actions and catch them in here, this is an easy way to do that. I think it looks great as well. This is kind of following the Redux way of doing things. You don't have to do it like this. You don't have to send the type of the action and blah, blah, blah. You can just send different payloads. If this was a counter, for example, you can send how much to update the counter for, or whatever. This is a pretty simple code, especially if you've worked with Redux or any of the other global state third-party libraries out there for React, but this for me is very familiar because I've used Redux before and it works in a similar way. I've kind of made it very, very similar to how I've used Redux in the past. I think it's great that React has these hooks. At the beginning they were lacking, that's why we had different third-party libraries coming up with different solutions for keeping a global state. But when they came out with context, I think it's great that we have these solutions from React made for React. And useReducer with use context, I think it's a powerful combination. Whenever you need to use it, whenever you need some more advanced logic for your state, useReducer is the way to go. And this is just one example. You can find loads out there, but whenever you have a situation where the useState is just not giving you enough flexibility, useReducer should be able to help. But I think for most cases, useState is going to be enough and it's going to be fine. That's been it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you have any feedback, put it down in the comments. I go through all the comments on my videos. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy coding. Bye.